let's talk about how we can color correct and color grade our footage in Premiere Pro. So I'm going to simplify this for our purposes, and color correction for us is just going to refer to any adjustments that we make to our exposure, so how bright or dark our image is, to how contrasty our image is, how saturated it is, and what the color balance looks like, so how warm our image is or how cool it is. Color grading is where we're going to develop a look for our video that kind of unifies all of our footage together. So before I do anything else, I want to get into a slightly better workspace for working on color. So I'm going to go to Window, Workspaces, and Color. And what we have is on our right side of our screen, we now have a Lumetri Color panel, which is where we're going to do all of our color correction and our look development, our color grading. Then we have our program monitor here still, which is showing us what's going on in our timeline, and our project window over here, and then we have Lumetri scopes over here. Now yours might by default have your source monitor up still. If you have a tab that says Lumetri scopes, click on that, and if not, just go to window and make sure Lumetri scopes is checked. By the way, if you ever want to move a window into another part of the screen, what you can do is click and drag on the name of the window and then drop it wherever it turns purple. So if I drop it on an edge here, it's going to create another section for me. But if I drop it in the middle of a section that already exists, it's going to drop it into a tab in that section, and then we can adjust the size of that. But I want to keep my scopes over here, so I'm going to move them back. So in your scopes panel, if it doesn't look like this already, which it probably doesn't, we want to go into our settings. So click on this wrench, and we have all these options here. We want to choose waveform, and then we want to choose waveform type Luma. What this graph is showing us is what's happening in our image from left to right. So this left part of the graph refers to the left part of the image, and the right part refers to the right part of the image. Vertically, on the y-axis, what we're getting here is information about how bright or dark our image is. So let me show you an example. If I go over to this gradient, we have a smooth transition from near black to near white here. And we can see that that's happening over the horizontal space of the image. The exposure values near 0 are darker, and the exposure values near 100 are brighter. We want to try to keep all of our footage within this 0 to 100 range, and actually it'd be even better if we kept it between sort of 5 and 10 on the bottom end, and topping out around 90 at the top. Let's actually look at another clip here, and this is kind of an interesting way to see how the Lumetri scope works, how this waveform scope works. So if I play this through, you'll probably notice that we can see the people moving through the image. So as they move from right to left in the shot, they're moving from right to left at the same pace in the scope. We have all these dark pixels here that are clumped down at the bottom, and that's this curtain in the background. Then we have this really bright space here. That's our really bright screen. We have some bright areas on each of the people because they're all wearing white on top, and then we have some darker values where we're seeing their pants, which are darker. So if we go to our first shot that we want to color correct, I'm going to start by opening up my basic correction tab. And once I make any adjustment in here, so if I change the exposure, it's going to create an effect on this piece of footage. So if I go to my effect controls, then we see that Lumetri color has been added. If I turn that on and off, you can see that the adjustment we made to exposure is also turned on and off. If I delete it, then it's gone. But I can go over here again, and in my Lumetri color panel, I can make more adjustments. These are non-destructive adjustments, which means if I make an adjustment that I don't like, and I click away from it, I can always go back and I can undo that. So let's just look through this basic correction tab here. In this, for our color correction purposes, this is all we're going to look at. So I have temperature under white balance here. I can make my image warmer or cooler. I have tint. I can make the image more magenta or more green. Exposure, we can pull it up, and that's going to make an overall adjustment to the brightness of the image. And you can see this getting translated over here in the waveform scope. can pull down, make it darker. Contrast is going to spread our scope out, so it's going to bring the darker values down and the brighter values up. If we pull in the opposite direction, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to bring our brighter values down and our darker values up. If we pull our whites up, it's going to take our very brightest values in the image and make them brighter. So it's going to pull this top section upward, and we can do that in the opposite direction too. If we take our blacks and we pull that up, it's going to make our very darkest values in our image brighter. If we pull down, it's going to make them darker. If we pull up on our highlights, it's going to take our values that are just under our whites, which are our brightest values, and it's going to pull those up. And if we pull up our shadows, it's going to take the areas that are brighter than the blacks, but darker than a midtone, and pull those up. And we have a saturation slider here too, so we can just bring more color into the image. Now, we don't want to get too extreme in the adjustments that we make. We want to make subtle adjustments. We don't want to pull all the way up on contrast. We don't want to pull all the way up on saturation and then max out our shadows and bring down our highlights and bring down our blacks. If we go too extreme with any of these, it's going to break down our footage and make it look really ugly. So I'm going to hit reset, bring everything back to 0. Reset my saturation as well. And I'm just going to look at these 3 shots together and try to identify what we want to do to them in basic correction. So this shot to me looks like it's well exposed, it's not too dark, it's not too bright, but we could probably add a little more contrast in here. I could bring up these top values a little bit. I kind of like where the shadows are right now, where the blacks are, down at 10, but I'd like to bring these brighter values up to about 90. So what I'm going to do is just grab my whites slider and pull it up till it hits 90. And to me, that looks pretty good. I might be able to bring down the blacks just a little bit. And now if I toggle this on and off, you can see that we've just brought a little more punch to the image, a little more contrast. I'm also going to add just a touch of saturation. Maybe 115 looks pretty good. And I think we're good there. In this shot, we're a little bit dark overall. Our brightest values are right at 65. I want to bring them up also to maybe 85. So I'm going to grab my whites slider again and pull that up until I hit that 85 range. And we're still a little bit dark, so I'm actually going to pull up my exposure slider just a touch, maybe 0.1. And now I think our blacks are getting a little bit washed out, so I'm going to pull the black slider down a little bit. And that looks pretty good to me in terms of contrast. Maybe I'll pull my highlights up a little bit as well, just to make them pop. Now, one thing I'm noticing in this shot is that his skin tone doesn't look natural to me. It looks a little too green. And that's something that I could have controlled in camera. I could have changed the white balance, but I didn't. So I need to make an adjustment there. I think it's going to be a small adjustment. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pull up a different scope. I'm going to pull up my Parade RGB. I'm going to turn off my waveform. And what I'm seeing here is, just like the waveform monitor, from left to right, each of these sections represents the entire image from left to right. So the red channel doesn't just refer to the third, this third of the image. The green channel is not just the middle. These are each representing the entire image. Now, it's giving us color information. So it's broken down our image into a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel, which have combined to make our color image. But I'm seeing that there's too much red in the highlights and too much green, so we're a little bit out of balance here. We want these to match a little bit better. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to try to get rid of some of that green that I didn't like. So that's looking better to me just by pulling that up to +12 on the magenta side. And then I still think maybe we're a little bit warm. I'm going to cool it off just a little bit. And now we don't have a perfectly even graph here, but I like how this image looks, and we've done a good job of making sure that it's not too green, because we started here and it just looks a little bit like there's a green cast over the entire image. I'm going to pull this up back to maybe just 10 is enough. And then let's look at this shot. What I'm noticing while we still have our RGB scope up, we should make an adjustment to the white balance here because his skin tone also just doesn't look natural to me. So I think it's too green again. I'm going to pull up a little bit on my magenta, maybe pull down on my temperature, make it a little bit cooler. A little more up on magenta. And then I'm going to go into my waveform scope again. And by the way, this RGB Parade can give you all the information you need about luminosity as well. It just makes it a little easier visually to read the waveform by itself. So I'm going to turn off the RGB now that we've made our temperature and tint adjustments. And it actually looks like we're pretty well exposed here. You can see that these really high parts up here around 100 are our windows, and they are very bright, but I don't mind that. We're really focused in on his face. I don't care if we can't see detail in these areas here. And I'm pretty sure if we try to drag down on our highlights, it's just going to start to, or maybe our whites, it's just going to gray out those areas. And the reason for that is there's no information that was recorded in those areas. It's too bright, it's too overexposed. So those areas are a lost cause. So all I'm going to do here is maybe just pull down on the black so tiny bit, pull up on the shadows a little bit, and then maybe add a tiny bit of saturation. And I still think he looks a little too warm and a little too green, so I'm going to pull down a little bit more on temperature, a little bit more up on tint, just until it looks right. You don't want it to go too far because then you'll get a magenta cast. Okay, I think that looks okay. Not perfect, but that'll work. So now our shots match a little bit better in terms of contrast and color. And we can move on to developing a look for our project. So over in your project window, if you right click anywhere outside of a clip name, so if you click on this, you won't be able to do it. But if you click to the side of it and say new item and adjustment layer, it'll create a new one for you. And you can just grab that adjustment layer, pull it into a higher video track, and then extend it over all of your clips that you want it to affect. So adjustment layers are transparent, but you can add effects to them. And so if I make, for instance, an exposure adjustment in Lumetri, it's going to create a new Lumetri color effect on this adjustment layer. And since this adjustment layer has been dragged over all three of these clips, it makes the same adjustment to all three of them. So I'm going to go ahead and zero this out. I'm going to bring my scopes back up. And then I'm going to close this basic correction tab and go into my creative tab. So Premiere has all of these great looks that they've incorporated into their software. So under creative in the look section, you can just arrow through these different looks and see a preview over in this monitor here. And when you find one that you like, I think I like this, then you just click on it and it will add it to your adjustment layer if you have that adjustment layer selected. And so now this look has been added to all three pieces of footage. So if I toggle this off, you can see the difference. And one thing I'm noticing is that I like the look of this overall, but I think it's a little bit too, it's adding almost a green cast. So I'm going to go back into my basic correction for this clip. And I'm just going to add a little bit more magenta. I'm going to do the same here. I don't think it needs quite as much more, which is why I'm not doing it on this adjustment layer overall. I want to always make my basic correction, my color correction adjustments to my original footage. And I think this one also looks just a little bit green now. So there we have it. These clips now match a little bit better than they did before. We've got a look on there that's unifying them a little bit. Here's the before and after with the look. And we've done some basic correction to them. So as always, let me know if you have any questions, and thanks so much for watching.